And it completely changed the history of that family because one father, one time, decided to do the right thing, and his son was watching.
How do we teach to the heart of our children?
Great question, and ultimately the eternal question. The rest of it, all is wood, hay, and stubble in the end, whether they can do a quadratic equation or not. My experience has been that kids aren't listening to much of anything we say, sadly, but they're watching everything we do, sadly. Kids are great observers, and matters of the heart are taught, and they're caught more than they're taught. When they watch how we conduct our lives, that's where matters of the heart are transmitted to our children, not by lecturing, not by Sunday school. I mean, that's a great thing. Not by youth group on Wednesday night. That's a great thing too. But in the end, your church has 40 minutes with them on Sunday and 40 minutes with them on Wednesday night. And if you're homeschooling, you've got probably 50, 60, 70 waking hours with them. And if your life isn't reflecting what they're being taught in those 40-minute blocks at church, they understand that. And, one of my favorite stories, Jane and I have traveled extensively over the years, and I love history, and somehow those two came together with a story that I came across many years ago, actually by Paul Harvey. He's been long since dead, but Paul Harvey used to be on the radio, and he did little 5-minute sections, and I always enjoyed what he had to say. How many of you ever played the game Battleship? Remember that game you play with your kids? That's where you call out to your kid, this square, is that where your battleship is? And your kid lies and says no, and quickly moves his battleship. You know the game I'm talking about? That's the game I'm talking about. Okay. Well, that's how naval war was conducted back in World War II. We didn't have satellites. We didn't have all the sophisticated communications things that we have today. And so when you were at sea in the World War II, you had a task force of ships. And in the center of that task force was a carrier on which were based aircraft. And those aircraft became your eyes and your ears. They became your offense and your defense. So you would launch a sortie of planes. They would go out, search around, going out further and further out, looking for enemy planes, looking for enemy ships to attack, looking for enemy planes that might be coming to attack you. The goal in naval warfare is to sink the other guy's carrier, because if you sink his carrier, you knock out about 5,000 to 6,000 sailors, and you put an end to his air crew, because now there's no runway out in the middle of the Pacific. When he runs out of gas, he's going to splash in the ocean. And so that process in World War II became the way war was conducted. There was a young naval aviator named Butch OHara, and Butch was stationed in the Pacific on a carrier in 1942. He took off with his shipmates, his air crew, and they were flying around looking, and he noticed that his fuel gauge appeared to be almost empty. And so he kind of tapped on it. Is it stuck? Is there something wrong? He calls his commanding officer. He said, "Sir, what do I do? It looks like I'm out of fuel." And he said, "Turn that plane around. It's an expensive aircraft. The taxpayers bought it. Get back to that ship safely, quickly, son." He says, "Aye, aye, sir." And he turns and heads back. And as he's heading back towards his aircraft carrier in the distance, he sees something sparkling on the horizon. And as he kind of edges over that direction to take a closer look, he sees an entire squadron of Japanese torpedo bombers coming directly on a course, headed directly for his carrier. So he's all alone. He realizes, I've got to do something about this. So he flies off in that direction. And in the next 5 minutes, he becomes an ace. He shoots down 5 Japanese planes in the next 5 minutes.
Wow.
When he runs out of ammunition, he begins using his plane as an offensive weapon, trying to knock the tail off one more of these Japanese planes before he crashes into the Pacific. He's so persistent that they conclude this guy's crazy, this American aviator. They turn and fly away, never seeing the American task force just ahead. He flies back, lands on the ship. They pull the gun cameras out of his wing, which confirm that he has 5 kills, because every time you pull the trigger on the gun, it shoots video, or not video, film. If you've ever flown in and out of Chicago, you've been to O'Hare Airport, named after Butch OHara for his courageous acts. There's pictures. There's actually a plane like his.
Oh, wow.
His plane doesn't exist because he came home to a hero's welcome, sold war bonds in 1943, went back for a second tour of duty and disappeared and was never seen again. He crashed somewhere at sea or was killed in combat. But a plane like his is hanging there, and there's photographs of, there's his uniform is hanging there. He had a Congressional Medal of Honor, a Naval Cross. There's pictures of President Roosevelt in his wheelchair shaking Butch OHara's hand, congratulating him and asking him to come home and sell war bonds as an American war hero. Here was a guy who was willing to give up his life for his fellow man. Hold that thought for just a minute. Let me tell you another story about a young attorney named Easy Eddie. Eddie only had one client. His name was Al Capone. He was on permanent retainer to Al Capone. And as you can imagine, he was privy to a lot of information that Al didn't want anybody else to know. And over time, Easy Eddie's name became synonymous with Al Capone. This isn't a political comment, but if you think of, for example, Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel, they both came out of Chicago politics. They were best buds. When Obama was elected, Rahm Emanuel became his chief of staff. After his first term, he came back to Chicago, was elected mayor of Chicago. You can't think of one without thinking of the other because their careers paralleled. So Easy Eddie, his name became synonymous with Al Capone, and that didn't particularly bother him because Capone provided him with a great salary, a mansion that covered the better part of a city block in downtown Chicago, a cook, a valet, a butler, a chauffeur, a limousine, all these benefits because Al Capone's life literally rested in Easy Eddie's hands. But over time, Eddie became less comfortable with his name because he had a son who was a junior, had the same name, and that son's name, as he got in towards high school, was also synonymous with Al Capone. And so he realized what the situation was, and he gathered financial records. And some of you know that Al Capone was never in prison for any of the horrendous crimes that he was involved in, but he was committed to life in prison because of tax fraud, tax evasion, because his own attorney turned over his financial records to federal authorities. He thought, for once, I'm going to do the right thing. And he figured that he could clear his name for the sake of his son, but he figured there'd be a price to pay, and there was. And it wasn't long after that that Easy Eddie was assassinated by one of Al Capone's operatives. You say, well, those are interesting stories, but what do they have to do with each other? Butch OHara was Easy Eddie's son. I didn't tell you Eddie's last name. It was Eddie OHara. And the name that was synonymous with prostitution, arson, murder, extortion, racketeering in Chicago is long since forgotten. All we know now is that name was synonymous with courage and self-sacrifice, willing to lay down his life for his fellow man.
Wow.
And it completely changed the history of that family because one father, one time, decided to do the right thing, and his son was watching. And when his son saw those Japanese planes, even low on fuel, he thought, what would my old man do? Oh, man, I'd take a bullet if that's how this turns out, but he'd do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so our kids are watching us, and matters of the heart take place in the most unexpected moments when our kids see us make a courageous choice, see us right or wrong, see us confess our sin, see us do the right thing with our finances, see us do the right thing with our spouse, our husband or our wife. And those make lasting, indelible impressions that can change the history of a family for generations to come. And to me, those lessons are caught more than taught. So we teach the academics, and we invite them to watch us live our lives courageously in the shadow of Christ and in the calling of the cross.
Yeah. And
generations are changed because of that.
Yeah. We are to become the wives and the moms that we want our girls to become, and the husbands and the dads that we want our sons to become.
Exactly.
And that's a high calling. It's not something that we can take for granted, and it's not something to take lightly. That's a high calling that God has given us.